We start on the battlefield. It's the Battle of Badr, and the newly formed Muslim army is staring down a vastly superior, heavily armed Meccan force. The stakes are absolute survival. But right before the two armies clash, the Prophet Muhammad issues a highly unusual, incredibly specific order to his soldiers. He tells them that if they cross paths with any men from the Banu Hashim tribe, they must not strike them down. That order was given because of one man standing in the enemy ranks, the Prophet's own uncle, Abbas. He had marched out with the Meccan army, heavily armed and seemingly ready to kill Muslims. Abbas was family, yes, but his presence on that battlefield was entirely calculated. While his fellow Meccans thought he was there to fight, he was actually Islam's very first deep cover intelligence agent, operating deep inside enemy lines in a life-or-death scenario. To understand how he got there, we have to rewind. Years earlier, the Prophet lost his primary protector, his uncle Abu Talib. That death created a dangerous power vacuum in Mecca, and leadership of the family fell straight to another uncle, Abu Lahab, who openly hated the Muslims and made their lives physically unsafe. With Mecca becoming hostile territory, the Muslims needed an exit strategy. In the dead of night, a group of representatives from a city called Medina slipped into the remote mountain passes outside Mecca. They were there to offer the Prophet sanctuary. Only two men showed up from the Meccan side, the Prophet and his uncle Abbas. At this point, Abbas publicly identified as a non-believer, yet standing in the dark, he aggressively interrogated the Medinans, demanding to know if they possessed the military strength to actually protect his nephew. They swore they would defend him to their last drop of blood. That midnight pledge triggered the Hijra. The Muslims packed up and migrated to Medina to build a new state. But Abbas made a deliberate choice. He did not pack his bags. He stayed behind in Mecca, completely surrounded by enemies. It was a brutal trade-off. He forfeited the physical safety of living among his family in Medina, all so he could become the indispensable eyes and ears for a nascent state that desperately needed inside information to survive. Which brings us back to the Battle of Badr. The Muslims win, and they capture dozens of Meccan soldiers. Among the prisoners sitting in the dirt is Abbas. Following standard rules of war, the Prophet demands that every captive pay a ransom to secure their freedom. In private, Abbas protests. He reveals that he had actually converted to Islam in secret before the battle even started, so he shouldn't have to pay. But the Prophet refuses to grant him an exception. The money changes hands, moving back to the very authorities trying to destroy them. It was a perfectly executed ruse. By forcing Abbas to pay up like every other captured enemy, the Muslims legally validated his loyalty to Mecca. His cover remained completely intact, and his cover was perfect. Abbas was a wealthy, highly respected businessman. He was a natural center of gravity in Meccan society. People talked to him. He knew exactly who was angry, how much money they had, and where they were moving. Over the next few years, before massive military encounters like the Battle of Uhud and the Battle of Khandaq, a secret courier would arrive in Medina. Abbas routinely funneled highly detailed intelligence on troop counts and marching routes straight to the Prophet, ensuring the Muslims were always anticipating the enemy's next move. While spears and swords dictated who controlled the desert sands, Abbas was quietly, systematically winning the invisible war of information. He maintained this double life for years, but eventually the political reality shifted. When 10,000 Muslims marched back to peacefully conquer Mecca, Abbas saw the massive army approaching. He knew his days dealing in whispers were over. He packed up his family, rode out to meet them on the road, and publicly joined the ranks. His timing was vital. Almost immediately after taking Mecca, the Muslim army marched out to face a coalition of hostile tribes at the Battle of Hunayn, and they walked straight into a trap. Caught in a narrow mountain pass, 12,000 Muslim soldiers faced a sudden, massive hail of arrows. The shock broke their lines, and the entire army turned and fled in panic. Amidst the chaos of fleeing men and animals, the Prophet Muhammad refused to retreat, steering his horse directly toward the enemy lines. Abbas, standing right beside him, lunged forward. He physically grabbed the horse's reins, hauling back with all his strength to stop his nephew from charging into certain death. The Prophet ordered Abbas, who was famous across the region for his incredibly loud, booming voice, to call the fleeing soldiers back. Abbas roared over the noise of the battlefield, reminding the men of their oaths. The sound of his voice cut through the panic. The soldiers yanked their camels around, surged back toward his location, and ultimately won the battle. For over a decade, Abbas survived by blending in and never drawing attention to himself. Now, stripped of his cover, he used his physical presence and the sheer volume of his voice to save the Islamic army from total collapse. Following the Prophet's passing, the new Islamic State expanded rapidly. Abbas, having moved to Medina permanently, transitioned into a revered senior statesman, advising the new caliphs on how to run a rapidly growing empire. But he didn't always agree with them. One day, the second caliph, Umar, was walking through the narrow alleyways of Medina. As he passed Abbas's house, dirty water spilled from a roof pipe directly onto his clothes. Frustrated, Umar ripped the pipe down and rerouted the drainage to keep the street clean for the public. Abbas didn't let it go. He marched straight to the local courthouse and sued the caliph. During the hearing, Abbas revealed that the Prophet himself had built that specific house for him and had personally installed that exact water pipe with his own hands. Realizing what he had done, Umar immediately forfeited the case. He walked back to the house, bent over, and forced Abbas to stand on his own shoulders to put the pipe exactly back where the Prophet had left it. By placing his own body in the dirt for Abbas to use as a ladder, the Caliph demonstrated that his political power ended where the personal legacy of the Prophet began. When Abbas passed away years later, the sheer volume of mourners in Medina was staggering. The crowd was so thick and chaotic that the sitting Caliph, Uthman, was completely swallowed up by the crush of people and had to order the police to physically extract him from the masses. That funeral marked the end of the man, but the lineage he left behind was just beginning its ascent. A century later, when a massive rebellion dismantled the ruling Umayyad dynasty, the new leaders identified themselves not by their titles, but by their bloodline. They named their new global superpower in honor of their ancestor, the Abbasid Caliphate. This is a gold dinar minted during their reign, a tiny fraction of the immense wealth flowing into the capital city they built from scratch, Baghdad. The Abbasids used that wealth to fund massive translation movements, build massive libraries, and heavily subsidize scientific research, sparking what we now call the Islamic Golden Age. A man who spent the prime of his life hiding his true identity in the dark to protect his family, ultimately left behind a name that would define 5 centuries of intellectual light.